Hi, this is Orion, and you're listening to Orion's Bedtime Stories podcast. While I have a number of short stories and fairy tales here, for the next little while, I'll be sharing a large chapter book with you, Illusion by Paula Volsky. For 200 years, the exalted classes have ruled over Vonar by virtue of their dazzling magical abilities. Now, their powers grown slack from disuse, they concentrate on the pleasures their station affords them, ignoring the misery of the lower classes. It is only when the red tide of revolution sweeps aside all distinctions of rank, home, and family that the exalted realize the gravity of their mistake. Thrust into the very center of the conflict is the beautiful Eliste de Raval, spirited daughter of a provincial landowner. Now, like those she disdained, she must scramble for bread in the teeming streets of the capital city, the key to her abilities an elusive secret, and find a way to survive in a world gone mad with liberty. Illusion by Paula Volsky. Chapter 7. The maids' quarters were surprisingly cramped and mean. Anticipating royal splendor, Eliste was dismayed to find herself sharing a plain, drafty chamber with 3 other girls of her own age. The room contained 4 narrow beds, 1 washstand, 2 chests of drawers, and a single cheval glass. A small adjoining chamber housed 4 big clothes presses and 4 pallets for the maidservants. 2 other suites of identical nature opened upon a stuffy communal sitting room. A 4th and far more luxurious suite belonged to the aged but still gimlet-eyed Marquise Vauquevesse, official mother to the maids. A short, dim corridor connected the sitting room to Queen Lallazay's vast apartment. The spill of boxes, baskets, hampers, and loose sundries cluttering every horizontal surface bore testimony to the inadequacy of the furnishings. The full extent of that inadequacy did not become fully apparent until the morning, when 4 girls competed for washstand and mirror. The contest began about dawn, when Quevesse came creaking in to roust her charges from their beds. Eliste opened her eyes reluctantly. She had come from the Queen's presence chamber but a scant 2 hours earlier, flushed with champagne, excitement, and a sense of wicked worldliness. Now she was paying for it. The other girls were already up. Fluttering and chattering, tussle-haired and sleep-rumpled, they jockeyed for space about the washstand. Their maidservants circled the group like solicitous satellites, and the air was alive with giggling insults. No bleary eyes or pasty complexions here, Eliste noted. Her roommates were fresh and well-rested, or at least contrived to appear so. The girl splashing at the basin, for example, the short one with black curls, spaniel eyes, and golden skin, glowed with an almost unexalted vitality. Beside her, exquisitely muted by contrast, stood a slim, human lily whose pale oval face and delicate features suggested otherworldly innocence. Behind them both loomed a very tall girl whose snub-nosed, cheerfully unremarkable face was offset by an almost embarrassingly voluptuous form, displayed to advantage in the flimsiest of silken wrappers. All of them were pretty, polished, unnervingly self-assured. "No malingering, girl," the voice of the old marquise broke in on Eliste's thoughts. "You are here to serve Her Majesty." Without awaiting reply, she stooped and yanked the coverlet to the foot of the bed. Eliste sat up, hastily adjusting her nightgown. A fresh chorus of giggles arose, and she colored deeply. Throwing Vauquevesse an indignant glance, she jumped from the bed. Cirthe swathed her in a light dressing gown, and she started for the washstand. One moment, Eliste halted, scowled. This last was a mistake. Perhaps you imagine, exalted miss, that you are here to entertain yourself. Quivesse folded her arms. Perhaps you think yourself a great chatelaine, or perhaps you think that you are queen. Allow me to inform you otherwise. Your new post as maid of honor, no sinecure, carries many obligations. It is to be hoped that your own sense of duty might ensure industry, modesty, decorum, and responsible behavior. If such is not the case, then I am here to safeguard Her Majesty's interests. Do not think to evade my vigilance, exalted miss. I have been here many years, and I have dealt with countless maids of dishonor. There is no trick I haven't foiled, no crafty stratagem I do not know. There is nothing you can devise that I have not seen and conquered long before you were ever born. Therefore, do not hope to shirk or slack. You will carry your own weight. You will perform your tasks faithfully. You will conduct yourself with dignity and decency, or else you will answer to me. Do I make myself clear? Not trusting herself to answer, Eliste turned away. This is worth at least one black mark on the list. Perhaps more. You have not started off on the right foot, exalted miss. I advise you to take care. So saying, Quivesse withdrew. Glowering, Eliste stalked to the washstand, splashed her flaming face with tepid water. Her roommate studied her with undisguised interest. Her obvious discomfort evidently awakened their sympathies, for the diminutive brunette remarked consolingly, "Don't mind the watchdog. She's like that with everyone." Watchdog? That's our name for the Quivesse, and she's earned it with all her snapping and snarling. She's very choleric, observed the statuesque one. Dyspeptic, too. Flatulent. Both in body and mind, interjected the brunette. It is her liver, I suppose, continued the statue, or else her spleen, or perhaps she fears that she is universally disliked. With good reason, chimed in the lily, whose unexpectedly deep, husky voice contradicted her ethereal appearance. Watchdog indeed! Meddlesome grey bitch is perishing of jealousy. That's exactly right. She can't stand it that we're young, and it drives her mad to see us amusing ourselves. She does everything she can think of to spoil our pleasure. Much good it does, the shriveled old stick. Could she stop Pussy Vaucrève from dining in Vauferneau's room? Or Friss Genoa from making an ass of herself over what's-his-name with a striped waistcoat? Or Dorine Vaudeliette from running off with Reveal Nisoir Lillevant for a week? There are always ways of getting around the watchdog. Someone should have stopped Dorine that time, though. Lillevant went and got her with child. At least she claimed it was his. I don't blame her. He's so beautiful. I wouldn't mind. Very good. I'll tell him you said so. Don't you dare. I'll demolish you. But did anyone ever find out for certain if it really was Levant's work? Could have been anyone's, opined the lily. Dorine's reputation already stank like a surf in summer, if you'll recall. Lillevant wasn't about to marry her, and neither was anyone else after that little escapade. Oh, is that why she packed off back to the country so suddenly? Clever girl. Which is more than can be said of the wretched Dorine. If the poor little trollop had possessed the least glimmering of intelligence, she'd have secured one of Dr. Zirk's revolting but effective potions, and so ridded herself of all encumbrance with no one the wiser. You should know. Ah, well, the lily smiled and shrugged. But Dorine, sentimentally irresolute in such matters, must sit vacillating until her condition becomes apparent to all, whereupon the watchdog goes mad, runs to and fro, foaming at the mouth and crying out that exalted Miss Vaudelyette's transgressions exceed all measurable limits, and she is therefore altogether and forever off the list, cast into outer darkness, her vile name utterly and irrevocably expunged. It was all very amusing. What's this list she speaks of? Eliste interrupted. She said I had a black mark. We all have black marks. I have 5. And I 6. I've racked up a score of 53 so far, announced the lily, and I'm hoping to hit 100 before the end of the year. But what exactly is this list? Nobody knows. No doubt we'll find out one day. In breathless anticipation, we wait the moment of revelation. Laughing, they introduced themselves. The little brunette was Josine Vaux-Chumel, her family great landowners in the Gironde. The semi-draped statue was Nian Vaux-Zurlot-Vinique from the Cevennes, daughter to His Majesty's Minister of Finance. The deceptively pure-faced lily was Marinotte Veste, granddaughter to no less than the Duke of Rivenière. 8 other girls of similar age and rank inhabited the neighboring suites, known respectively as Maids Rose and Maids Blanche. Eliste's arrival, timed to fill the vacancy created by the abrupt departure of the luckless Doreen Vaudelyette, brought the total count of maids up to the requisite dozen. Chatter continued as the servants began to dress them. As Kirtha laced her into Madame Nemé's weightless peach Tiffany morning gown, Eliste acquired more information. She learned that the Maids of Honor subsisted on an average of 4 hours of sleep a night. She discovered that indefatigable purging maintained a small-waisted figure. She found that gifts from wealthy patrons augmented the contributions of tight-fisted provincial fathers. She was informed that the secretions from the musk glands of the wherein, mixed with olive oil, ground nissimut, and saliva, infallibly blocked conception. She learned that the Cavalier Vaux-Fourneau, Catholic in his tastes, preferred very blonde boys to indifferently blonde girls. She heard that the Queen's incessant coquetry masked an essential coldness, or perhaps an unconscious warmth, never awakened by the King's inexpert advances. She discovered that King Dunulus did not visit his Queen's apartment more often than once a month, and never stayed longer than half an hour. The edifying conversation was cut short by the return of the Marquise Vaucouvesse, who entered to announce that the Duchess of Ferrante, First Lady of the Queen's bedchamber, required the presence of 3 or 4 maids to assist in the survey of the royal wardrobe. The girls in Eliste's chamber, Maids Mauve, had been selected. They were to report to the Duchess at once and serve her as directed, after which they would be free to amuse themselves until the Queen's levee, scheduled for mid-morning. There was no definite time allowance for breakfast. The Maids of Honor regarded as so many hothouse blossoms, were evidently expected to subsist on candlelight and compliments. In reality, they were forced to scrounge for themselves as best they could. The girls filed from the room. A sharp clucking sound from the Marquise arrested Eliste. "One moment. This was delivered for you not 15 minutes ago. I considered withholding it, but in view of the sender's noble eminence, deemed it only fitting to trust in his chivalry, if not your prudence. Here." Couvesse extended a small package wrapped in wine velvet and black satin ribbon. Attached to the package was a square card bearing an embossed crest, which Eliste studied in momentary incomprehension. Ferrante! Whooped a voice at her ear. Eliste swiveled to find Marinot Viste just behind her. The human lily appeared unaccountably amused. There are his arms, in every sense. Ferrante commences a new siege, a new fortress, a new campaign. But do his old cannons still fire, or have age and rust done their work? I wonder. Ladies, come see. Look here. Eliste reddened as her roommates came trooping back in. Noting the look, Marinot shrugged. Come, child, no blushes. You've a new set of sisters, every bit as tiresome and officious as real sisters could be. No point in holding back. You shall have our opinions whether you want them or not. Now, what has he sent you? Let us see. Torn between eagerness and embarrassment, Eliste stripped away the ribbons and wrappings, opened a brocade-quilted box to reveal a circlet of fine, translucent jade links, glittered in emeralds and clasped in gold. Following an unsatisfying attempt to drape the chain about her wrist, she observed, frowning, "It must be meant for a giantess." "Little savage, that is an anklet. Try it on." "On my leg? Try it, try it." Eliste complied. Handing the ornament to Cirthe, she raised her peach-cloud skirts to present a silk-clad, lace-gartered calf. Cirthe fastened the gold clasp, and Eliste rotated her ankle experimentally. The jade links, wonderfully cool, gleamed like deep sea water. "Ah, it suits her. The color is tremendous." "She must wear her skirts short to show it off." "Indeed she must, and start a new fashion. Short in the front, with a brief ruffled train run on drawstrings." "And we shall call the new mode Citadel Stormed," Marinot suggested helpfully. "Or perhaps Ferrante's Conquest?" "Ferrante's Folly might be more appropriate," Eliste returned. "But let us see what he writes." The color burned in her cheeks, belying her artificial composure. Opening the card, she read, "Exalted Miss, I invite you to dine with me this evening. A footman will appear to escort you to my apartment at 10 o'clock. I prefer that you do not wear perfume. Ferrante." She looked up. "Blunt, isn't he?" "His Grace minces no words," Nian agreed. "After all, why should he?" "What will you say to him when you meet?" Jazine demanded. "Will you be melting and languishing, or will you be all cool and mysterious? What will you wear? Will you be nervous? I should be petrified." I've no reason to be nervous," Eliste informed them, "for this simple reason that I'm not going." "Are you serious?" Jazine's spaniel eyes rounded. "We're speaking of His Majesty's own brother," Nian pointed out. "You can't refuse his invitation." "I'm not interested in his pedigree. I'll refuse if I like." "You're new and you don't understand. It just isn't done." "Well, it is now. I'm not going." Eliste's jaw set. "Why ever not?" Because I just don't like him, that's why. He's a deal too sure of himself and too peremptory, almost insultingly so. I consider him impudent." "You loony, you'll ruin your own chances. Don't you know that a duke can't be impudent?" "This one can. As for this summons of his, I'll be glad to tell him what he can do with it." Eliste tore the duke's card in two and tossed the halves away. Marinot Viste shouted with laughter. "Oh, the citadel is well guarded. The gate is firmly barred. Ferrante has his work cut out for him. This promises much entertainment." Actually, my dear, I think your strategy not unsound. His Grace will find the challenge piquant, and your resistance will surely awaken his ardor. That's not why I'm resisting, Eliste told her. I don't want his ardor, or anything else of his for that matter. Gertha, she snapped her fingers, take the anklet off me, drop it in its box, and carry it back to the Duke of Fronte. Thank his Grace on my behalf, and convey my regrets that I am unable to accept his invitation. You want me to speak to the Duke, miss? To the Duke himself? As she spoke, Gertha was already stripping the ornament from her mistress's ankle. Or one of his lackeys. It is of little consequence, wish. Kill me dead, Gertha exclaimed, and her fellow servants exchanged amazed glances. How'll I ever find him in all this great anthill of a place, miss? It goes on for miles, don't it? Muffled giggles arose among the Maids of Honor. The Marquise Vauqueves's lips thinned. Ask the servants for directions, Eliste advised. Can I mark a trail to find my way back? No, just ask. Can I use the pot before I set off? I'm that nervous. I don't want to hear about it. Really, you are such an infant. Suffocating with laughter, Nian clutched Jazine for support. Queves's foot began to tap. Well, don't pitch a screamer, miss. I'm gone. Box in hand, Gertha scurried from the room. She's an original, that one, Marinot observed with a smile. But truly, my dear, I think you do yourself a disservice. Ferrante's gift is pretty and becoming. Why refuse it? I do not wish to offer false encouragement. Why not? That is an integral part of the game, and by no means the least enjoyable. I'm not playing a game with the Duke. But he is playing one with you, and you may as well return the compliment. What he does scarcely dictates my actions. God, what relentless rectitude, what provincial probity, what vinegar virtue, or else what uncommon arrogance. I don't want to obligate myself to Ferrante. There you mistake the matter. In accepting an admirer's gift, you do not obligate yourself in the slightest. Here in Shereen, the gallant so crass as to regard a lady as his debtor could only be dismissed as a boor. His offerings are merely the rightful tribute to your charms, and as such should be encouraged, even demanded. And that, too, is part of the game. She's right, you know, chimed in Jazine Vauchamel. You should never have given up that gorgeous anklet. I never should. How could you bear to let it go? Inquired Nian. It was almost as beautiful as Lillivant himself, and so much in the mode. Our transplanted wild rose will know better the next time, opined Marinot. That there will be a next time, and soon, I do not doubt for a moment. That will do, you feather-headed chits. The Marquise Vauqueves clapped her hands sharply. Enough! It is time to... Her Grace of Ferrante. Oh, I'm dying! Exclaimed Jazine. What a farce! I can't endure it! Cried Nian. Brows lifted. Eliste turned to Marinot. That's right, Marinot correctly interpreted the questioning look. Her Grace of Ferrante, First Lady of the Queen's Bedchamber, to whom we must now look for direction, is your royal tomcat's oft-betrayed spouse. His wife. Delightful. Things couldn't be better. I don't suppose there's much hope that she won't be told of this? Afraid not, child. Too many witnesses. Her Grace will know within minutes, if not already. But what of that? She should be used to such news by now, and in any event, the plaints of an aging, jealous wife are only the stuff of comedy. She might make herself a trifle disagreeable, but you can afford to laugh. Ah, but it's also sordid. Such a disagreeable way to start out. You have brought it on yourself, Quivesse informed her. You young girls of today have no standards, no pride. If such a great noble such as his grace takes note of you, that is because you have sought his attention. If his duchess scorns and detests you, it is because you have given her cause. Therefore, cease your complaints. Whatever failure and censure you suffer, be assured it is no more than you deserve. Now, go! The confrontation with the Duchess of Ferrante wasn't nearly as bad as Eliste had feared. The Duchess, a horse-faced, large-handed, impassive woman, proud daughter of one of the oldest great families, and some years senior to her straying spouse, greeted the new maid with detached courtesy and set her to work cataloguing Lallazay's numberless gloves. If she knew of the Duke's interest in exalted Miss Vauderival, she was too well bred to show any sign of it, but went about her work in dignified composure that revealed nothing. In the absence of overt hostility, Eliste's tension eased. Her 3 roommates, mischievous scandal-mongers all, were no doubt disappointed. But Eliste, considerably relieved, was able to relax and take stock of her surroundings, marveling at the scope of the full-size suite of rooms that housed the Queen's astounding wardrobe. One of the chambers contained a walk-in closet given over entirely to the storage of gloves, which reposed in innumerable wooden boxes stacked on narrow shelves specially designed to receive them. In the closet sat Eliste, opening each box in turn and entering brief accounts of the contents into a great ledger. 1 pair glove, wrist length, lavender suede, white silk embroidery, Australian cutwork. 1 pair glove, 3/4 length, dark blue kid, silver buttons, crystal plus silver beading. And so on, interminably. The purpose of the survey was not apparent, but the work was easy, the chance to inspect the Queen of Vonar's personal belongings novel, and time passed quickly. In the adjoining chambers, Josine, Nian, and Marinot busied themselves with similarly inconsequential tasks. Long before their respective labors were completed, the Maids of Honor were dismissed. Preparations for the Queen's levee had begun. The 4 girls repaired to their sitting room, where, for the first time, Eliste encountered her compeers from Maids Rose and Maids Blanche, a gaggle of pretty, noisy, frivolous young exalteds, doll-perfect in their pastel silks, similar in type to her own Maids Mauve roommates. In accordance with what appeared to be a well-established custom, food began to appear on the tea table in the middle of the room. Someone had charmed a bagful of chocolate raspberry cream puffs from the palace pastry chef. There was a basket of late strawberries, a heap of yesterday's petit fours, a pile of bonbons, and amidst shrieks of universal approbation, Marinot Veste brought forth 6 bottles of champagne, properly chilled. No one asked where they had come from. Marinot's flair for unorthodox procurement was proverbial, and it was usually better not to question her methods. Corks popped, flutes materialized, champagne flowed, and bubbles danced. Eliste regarded her glass with misgiving. Champagne for breakfast seemed so marvelously luxurious, she scarcely dared confess that she would actually have preferred fruit juice at that hour of the morning. But it was fruit juice, she reminded herself, the very best kind, and she would look like a straight-laced ninny if she refused to drink it. Still somewhat reluctant, she took a tentative sip. The champagne was sweet, selected to complement a pastry breakfast, light and seemingly innocuous. Forgetting her doubts, she drank freely, and only the And only the winged lift of her spirits, the warm sense of pleasure and assurance that flooded her veins, might have reminded her that she partook of something more potent than ginger punch. All around her, the maids were giggling and nibbling, sipping and gossiping like so many flowers imbued with human appetites. They spoke of fashion, food, and flirtation, and the atmosphere of giddy gaiety waxed hilarious when Josine Vauchamel informed the company that the newest addition to their sisterhood was the latest object of Ferrante's imperious attentions. Frisset Vengeois proposed a toast to the Ferrante enterprise. Screaming with laughter, they clinked glasses, and Eliste felt herself accepted. As the carouse continued and the champagne did its work, the talk grew racier and the anecdotes more outrageous. At first, Eliste only listened, scandalized and delighted. Presently, her bubble-bolstered confidence mounted, and she was chattering and giggling along with the rest of them. All the provisions were consumed, down to the last crumb of frangipane-filled petit four. The last bottle was drained, and it was time to move on to the Queen's levee. Eliste stood up, a little uncertainly. A curious sense of mild paralysis stiffened her joints, and by some trick of vision, the room and everything in it seemed to have receded. So much for champagne in the morning, although she noticed hazily none of her companions seemed at all impaired. Suddenly dizzy, she swayed, and might have fallen, had not a slim white hand reached out to steady her. "Careful, child," Marinot Veste advised. "Here, chew one of these." She offered a small white pastille. "What is it?" Eliste's tongue felt thick and slow. "These excellent tablets come from the ingenious Dr. Zirk. Just one of them will keep you awake and alert for hours. Thus it becomes possible to drink champagne to your heart's content, to dance or game until dawn, to diminish those dreary intervals of sleep, or to dispense with sleep altogether, if you choose, and still remain fresh as spring rain, or at least appear so." "Truly? How do they do that?" "I could hardly say how. Dr. Zirk, plebeian that he is, and little more than a glorified mechanical, may perhaps concern himself with such matters, but I do not. Enough to know that they are effective, always useful, and not infrequently essential. Chew it slowly, my dear, or else we shall have you flying about the Queen's bedchamber like a great peach-colored bird." Eliste chewed and swallowed obediently. A moment later, a rush of new vitality swept the sluggishness from her mind and body. Suddenly, she was alert and charged with energy, enough to sustain her for days, weeks, years. Assured, optimistic, even joyful, and alive, she was certain as never before. Exhilarated, she laughed aloud. "Hush, a little discretion," Marinot advised. "I feel wonderful." "Did I not promise?" "Wonderful! Could I get some of these?" "Assuredly. They are easily procured and almost indispensable. Another few days here, and you will not understand how you ever existed without them." Vigor more than restored, Eliste followed her sister maids through the short corridor back into Queen Lallazay's apartment, this time proceeding directly to Her Majesty's immoderately feminine bedchamber. In the middle of the room rose a great carved and gilded four-poster, boasting an arched canopy draped in pink-flowered silk hangings lined in gold, priceless lace coverlet, and a mountain of ruffled, frilled, and embroidered white pillows. Propped up in bed, as if newly awakened, sat Her Majesty, face freshly painted, hair glistening with pomade and sculpted into clusters of curls, each ruffle and ribbon upon her lingerie bed jacket faultlessly ironed. The queen had, as was her wont, submitted herself to the ministrations of waiting women and hairdresser for the space of 2 hours before climbing back into bed to receive her callers. The morning light filtering through the pink-swathed windows was cunningly muted, and in that flattering soft glow, Lallazay looked young as her own Maids of Honor. Now she sat sipping chocolate and whispering earnestly up at Dr. Zirk, who bent over her with an air of dedication. Often she gestured, expressive hand fluttering distressfully from her brow to her throat to her heart, while the doctor nodded in understanding and grave compassion. Deployed about the room were the queen's closest personal attendants, ranging in age and kind from Lallazay's own choice of the youthful and charming Princess Wherein to a grim knot of prune-faced duchesses whose rank entitled them to royal proximity. The maids advanced in single file to kiss their mistress's hand. Lallazay greeted them kindly but inconsistently, beaming upon her particular favorites, bestowing vague, puzzled smiles upon those whose names she did not remember. The line moved quickly, and then Eliste was pressing her lips to the neroli-scented, nervous little hand whose nails, she noted for the first time, were bitten to the quick. Lallazay produced the obligatory smile. Her eyes fastened attentively upon Madame Nimé's inspired creation. She seemed hardly to note the wearer. Eliste straightened, nodded with a certain distant civility to Dr. Zirk, whose social status was ambiguous, and backed neatly away. In the face of familiarity, her awe of royalty was fading fast. Around her tittered and snickered the incorrigibly light-minded maids. Frisée en joie poked an elbow into her ribs and pointed. Eliste followed the pointing finger to behold Nian Vo Zirovinique, attired in a morning gown, cut low to exploit her natural advantages, cut to the extreme limit of propriety, or perhaps beyond, bending and swelling over the queen's hand. Dr. Zirk's watery eyes were fixed upon Nian's décolleté. His narrow face was noticeably flushed and moist. Eliste's merriment rose almost unquenchably. She clapped a hand across her mouth and studied the carpet. A couple of sputters escaped her, and she bit a knuckle. She must be cool and exalted and self-possessed. Yes, she must. She stole a glance at Frise, beet red and tremulous. Her eyes jumped back to Nian, unconsciously indecent. Her self-control slipped, and the giggles quivered on the edge of escape. Almost she considered dashing from the room. She might have done so, had the queen's callers not begun to arrive at that time. First and foremost among them were the Duke and Duchess of Ferrante. The Duchess was cool, impeccable, impenetrable. Ferrante equally so. He didn't appear to see her. As he fetched chocolate and biscuits from the sideboard for his wife, he seemed not to know Eliste was there. If she had not refused his gift, he might have thought it worthwhile to acknowledge her presence. As it was, she did not exist. Only once the Duchess of Ferrante's eyes shifted to the new maid's face to rest there for a levelly appraising moment, and in that brief moment the Duchess's awareness revealed itself. Eliste's amusement died a quick death. All of a sudden she felt cold and shabby, guiltless but inappropriately ashamed. She did not have to endure the Duchess's scrutiny for long. Having paid their respects to the Queen, the Maids of Honor retired to the sidelines, there to fulfill their customary ornamental function. The 4 Maids' Mauve roommates took possession of a pink brocade love seat and a couple of gilt chairs in one corner. Disposing their wide skirts prettily, They sat watching and whispering behind their fans as the most exalted of visitors came striding, marching, gliding, or mincing into the Queen's bedchamber. Presently, the room was filled with patched and powdered courtiers, a rainbow swarm of them, the majority clustered about the Queen. Lallazay, still sitting up in bed, was chattering and gesturing with girlish, exaggerated animation, teasing, bridling, tossing her head, and laughing continually. Her clear, high-pitched tones were easily audible above the hum of respectfully muted, exalted conversation. The greetings continued, and the guests began to diffuse throughout the room. Chairs, settees, window seats, and even footstools were quickly occupied. Clumps of conversationalists stood scattered here and there, with a high concentration of activity centering about the sideboard with its urns of chocolate and plates of biscuits. Seating herself at the little white and gold spinet, the Princess Wherein began to pick out a tune, the sugared notes softly underscoring the well-modulated babble of exalted voices. Eliste gazed about her, spying many familiar faces, a number of them belonging to her dancing partners of the previous night. Even as she watched, the exalted Vecchi Viceroy appeared upon the threshold, a little disheveled, visibly out of breath, and quite shamefully late. An amused buzz greeted his conspicuous arrival. Rushing to the Queen's side, Vecchi bent to kiss her hand, muttering contritely. Smiling, Lallazay slapped his wrist lightly, evidently pardoning him without reservation, whereupon the scene lost its interest, and Eliste resumed her survey of prospective suitors. Noting her absorbed expression, Marinot remarked, "They will be over here as promptly as etiquette allows." "Who will?" "The gentlemen." "Which gentlemen?" "I did not observe," Eliste lied. Did you not?" Marinot laughed, so infectiously that Eliste could not resist echoing her. "They'll be upon us like hungry wolves, probably within moments." "Well, I should hope so," interjected Jazine. "Otherwise, Pootsie Vaucrève and her Maids Blanche gang will never let us see the end of it. They'll gloat." "I should not care to be ignored," Nian remarked. "Given the depth of your décolleté, my dear, there is little fear of that." "I should loathe sitting here alone, forsaken and forgotten and ignored. I should abominate it. If it happens, I shall certainly die." "Cheer up, you're saved. Here comes Fernot." "Aha! That will put Pootsie's nose out of joint and properly." To them came the Cavalier Fernot, armed with a plateful of walnut biscuits, a mouthful of compliments, and a misleadingly guileless smile. Biscuits and compliments were accepted with equal enthusiasm. Shortly thereafter, Pootsie's elegant brother Stasy Vaucrève joined them, to be followed in quick succession by Vecchi Viceroy, by Jazine's wealthy admirer Nalil Vaudens, and last, the Marquis Lieu-Verliard, a little old and staid for that heedless young group, but quietly determined to stay. The gallantries and witticisms flew. Banter was quick and often barbed, but Eliste, used to dueling with Dref Zenoson, was easily able to hold her own. Moreover, it seemed to her that Marinot's pastille had imbued her mind with an almost supernatural sharpness, and she was correspondingly self-assured. Riveting Vecchi with a coquettish, slanting glance, she challenged, "And must we assume that last night's magical exertions drained the vitality of the exalted Vecchi? How else shall we account for an entrance so dramatically delayed?" Vecchi's jewel-flecked teeth flashed in a multi-hued smile. "Happy the man whose failings warrant censure of the radiant Miss Vaux d'Araval. Her very reproofs impart distinction, and her approbation nothing less than immortality. Very pretty, sir, but you evade the issue. Bear with your humble servant, exalted miss. I do not evade the issue. I merely approach it in gradually diminishing circles, like any good hunter. Slowly, moving with infinite care and discretion, I draw near. I pause, I wait, I weigh, I consider. Eventually, I pounce, by which time the original issue has inevitably been forgotten. Becky, is there no end to your nonsense? Jazine inquired severely. None, exalted miss, in which infinite capacity surely lies my greatest social asset. Your greatest social asset will lie in your absence if you won't satisfy a curiosity, Marinette warned him. The poison lily. Very well, exalted miss, I would not risk your displeasure. Then know, ladies, that last night's exertion failed to drain my vitality. My vitality is equal to all occasions, and I ask nothing more of life than the fair Vaux d'Araval's consent to prove it. Alas, no similar elan fires the veins of my coachman, a sorry rogue if ever there was, whose faint heart occasioned this morning's mishap. When he encounters difficulty, do you suppose it arouses valor, his warlike spirit? It does not. No, the slightest setback utterly unnerves him. The very first obstacle, and he is overcome, and I along with him. It is almost enough to drive a man pedestrian. But I have given the matter much sober consideration. Sober? Surely not. Naren tossed her head. And I believe I have hit upon the only sane and reasonable solution to the problem. I have decided that we must start breeding coachmen, Becky informed them. We breed horses for speed, dogs for cleverness, and cattle for size, not without success. It is only reasonable to assume that the same principles, judiciously applied to our serfs, may eventually produce the ideal coachman. Sharp-eyed, steady-handed, resolute and courageous, impervious to weather, with an excellent sense of direction and an innate understanding of horses. In time, assuming the line flourishes, we whip breeders, as we shall be known, may perfect the type to such an extent that we shall become suppliers of purebred coachmen to the monarchs and nobility of all civilized nations. And having accomplished this, we may turn our efforts to the creation of the perfect, true breeding valet, the perfect gardener, and, above all, the perfect cook. But first things first. In order to commence, we require the services of a coachman nonpareil, together with a fertile female of notably equine demeanor. Might not her Grace of Ferrante volunteer? Gales of malicious laughter greeted this sally, and the red-faced Jazine managed to choke. Becky, what a frippery you are! Becky bowed, and Eliste, still laughing, inquired, And what was this terrific obstacle that routed your coachman? Streets full of riotous peasants, that's what. Between the Bevier and the girdle at Havelock, the streets are almost unnavigable. Everywhere the beggars, the laborers, the little shopkeepers, and such rabble swarm and howl, clapping their hands, hurling rocks and clods. What they think to gain, I cannot pretend to guess. It is all very noisy, very foolish, very annoying. They clog the streets, impeding progress, and worse, they frighten the horses. That's true, the Marquis. That's true. The Marquis Faux Lieuverliard nodded his white-wigged head gravely. On my way back from the new arcade, the din in the streets threw my blacks off stride, and some fool put a scratch on the side of my cabriolet. A bad business. Disgraceful. But what is all this din about? Eliste persisted. What's happening?
You're behind the times, exalted miss. You've not yet heard last night's news, Becky told her. You must have known that the Shatterbox Nerienne was earmarked for the sepulchre, charged with treason, sedition, and writing bad verse or whatever.
I'd heard that.
Well, when the gendarmes called at his lodgings last night, they discovered an empty nest. Nerienne had very sensibly withdrawn, but the wretched slum was riddled with his clownish partisans who seized the opportunity to rampage through Rat Town. Up and down the streets, they cavorted like third-rate mummers in search of an audience. Presently, they emerged into University Square, where the destruction of the 10 monarchs provided momentary amusement. Half of them were screaming for liberty, half of them were screaming for blood, and all of them were stinking of garlic. Presently, some zany of a self-styled demagogue got up to harangue the crowd, which responded with heartfelt grunts and hoots, hot blasts of fury laced with an infinity of garlic.
How do you know all this, Becky? Inquired Marinot.
Perhaps by my exalted magic.
Becky was clearly enjoying himself.
Have I not proved my power? You must have faith, my lily, faith. In any event, you may rest assured that the destruction of all University Square was averted only by the arrival of the crowd queller and his men, who stampeded the human herd in time to preserve the lecture halls. Peace, or a good facsimile thereof, was restored.
Temporarily, suggested Nelil Voldens.
Just so. The uproar recommenced about dawn, continued long enough to delay my attendance upon Her Majesty, and presumably has not subsided yet. To my mind, Furneaux offered, they are welcome to bellow, grimace, prance, and loot wine shops to their heart's content, provided they confine their idiotic impertinence to Rat Town, the 8th District, and other such inconsequential pest houses. Amidst such squalor, the flame that consumes must be viewed as a purifying agent. They've not confined their idiotic impertinence, Becky told him. That is all the trouble. They're racketing all over Shereen.
But why? Eliste demanded. If Nerienne escaped, and I can't be altogether sorry that he did.
Ah, the sentimentalist.
The young romantic,
Stasi chaffed.
He is a cut above Master Huis Valeur, you'll grant, Marinot suggested.
Valeur, come, does a rabid mongrel deserve notice?
If Nerienne escaped, Eliste persisted gamely, then what are they shouting about? What do they want? What would it take to make them give over and go home?
The crowd queller is what it would take, and we may hope that the king will soon see fit to dispatch him, said Becky. Beyond that, there is no solution, Furneaux agreed. I'm told they scream for bread and justice. Alas, there is not enough bread for all, and never will be. That is the only way of the world. As for justice, they are not intellectually equipped to encompass the concept. Such abstractions are best left to those capable of understanding.
Eliste nodded in reluctant agreement.
They shout for a brief time, observed Faucrève, and then they are silent. What else is left to them? When all is said and done, they cannot know what they want, for in that they require guidance, as children do.
Somehow Eliste found herself thinking of Drefzinoson. He had not been at all a child, despite his youth, but it did not seem the time to say so. Her confusion deepened when a liveried footman materialized at her side to hand her a folded note. For a moment, she stared at the paper square in incomprehension, wondering where it had come from. Then, impelled by instinct, she raised her eyes to encounter the gaze of His Grace of Ferrante, who stood alone on the far side of the room. The Duchess was nowhere in evidence.
Presumably, she had faded away at some point or other, her exit unnoted by all save her interested spouse. Following their companion's glance, the maids traded significant smiles. Eliste considered returning the note unopened, but curiosity got the better of her. Unfolding the paper, she read silently, "Exalted Miss, inasmuch as my offering failed to please you, you are encouraged to select an alternate more to your liking. Please convey notice of your choice at the earliest opportunity, at which time you may specify the date and hour of our next meeting. Ferrante." The unmitigated boor! The furious color burned in her cheeks. The undisguised amusement of her companions added fuel to the fire. Almost she considered passing the note around the room, to the delectation of all, but concluded that such an act would reflect more discreditably upon herself than the Duke. There were better ways. She shredded the note thoroughly, and then, eyes locked with Ferrante's, tossed the fragments into the air to loose a tiny, momentary blizzard. The quiet snickers all around her gave way to open laughter. Josine and Nian clutched one another. Marinotte's lips turned down at the corners. Even Lallazay was watching, astonished, and not altogether pleased with her new maid's bid for attention. Ferrante himself did not change expression. Dark eyes impenetrable, he regarded her. Then, bidding brusque farewell to his satellites, he wheeled and made for the exit, where the appearance of a brace of frozen footmen discreetly signaled the close of the Queen's levee. Eliste scarcely noted what happened thereafter. The levee ended, and she was back in the maids' quarters with her roommates. The Queen had no further need of their services throughout the day. The other girls vanished, all of them sought after. Eliste herself, she recalled almost as an afterthought, had made a number of assignations. Stasie Vaucreve for the midday meal, Vaux Lieu-Villiard for a stroll about the Bavière gardens, Vicky Viceroy for a hand of anti-slaise, Vaux Renache for a cup of punch at Madame Vaux Fillion's night fest. All of these she scrupulously, if indifferently, honored, carried along in a rush of energy born of Dr. Zirk's white pastille. The effect lasted for many hours, far into the night. Later, much later, she returned to the maid's mauve chamber, tired to death but wide awake, depressed and dry-mouthed, desert-eyed, shaky-limbed, jumpy, and prey to the jerk-muscled jitters. She didn't know what was wrong, but when someone offered her another pastille, this one, veal pink and guaranteed to bring quick repose, something impelled her to refuse. Sleep was impossible. Condemned to consciousness, she occupied herself as best she could with Marinotte's surreptitious copy, obtained no one knew where, of the latest neighbor Jamal's complaint. The ooze-minded editor, the self-styled Huis Valier, was foul and abusive as ever. This week, this issue, he accused the young, widowed Princess Varian of poisoning her husband in order to remove all obstacles standing between herself and total domination over her unnatural lover, the Queen Lallazay. As time passed and the candles burned low, Eliste read on, half amused, half horrified, wholly revolted. In her disgust, she quite dismissed the public significance of the muckraking journalist. He was a madman, an asinine liar, an ugly joke, but surely no cause for concern. For who outside a public hospital could be so misguided as to believe in Huis Valier?
Thank you for listening to Orion's Bedtime Stories podcast. We hope you've enjoyed it. and that you have a lovely, relaxing evening. Thank you, and sweet